I travel a lot for work and always try to save money by staying in Airbnbs. When I booked this one in Denver, the photos showed a simple but clean room with a made bed and a basic decoration. The ad talked about cozy environment and good reviews, so I didn't suspect anything. When I arrived, however, I realized that something was wrong. The room had no real bed, only an inflatable mattress thrown on the floor, dirty and with old stains. There were clothes scattered around the corners, and even used dishes stacked near the door. The smell was of mold and old food, completely different from what the ad promised. I confronted the host, expecting at least an apology, but he acted as if that was normal. He just shrugged and said, "You get used to it quickly." That made me uncomfortable, because it seemed that he was not at all concerned about the guest's experience, as if it had already happened other times. Even tired from the trip, I couldn't relax. I took pictures of the room to register and started looking for another place to stay, but it was already late at night and almost everything was full. The idea of sleeping in that dirty and strange environment kept me on constant alert, as if something worse was going to happen at any moment. That first night, I was lying down without being able to close my eyes properly. The mattress creaked with every movement, and the noise from upstairs sounded like heavy steps walking from one side to the other. The strange thing is that the host had said that I would be the only guest, and that he himself would not be there. The more I paid attention, the clearer it became that someone was walking around the house. I took my cell phone and started recording, just to prove that I wasn't imagining. And really, in the video you could clearly hear the sound of footsteps dragging furniture, as if someone was reorganizing the things above my room. I was paralyzed, trying to decide if I should leave immediately or wait until dawn. Around 3 in the morning, I heard the bedroom doorknob being tested, turning slightly, as if someone was checking if it was unlocked. The heart almost came out of my mouth, and I held my breath, praying that they wouldn't insist anymore. After a few seconds, the noise stopped, but the steps continued down the corridor. At that moment, I decided I wouldn't stay even one more night there. I spent the rest of the morning sitting on the edge of the mattress, with the suitcase ready next to me, just waiting for the sun to rise. I didn't have the courage to go out in the middle of the darkness, knowing that there was someone circulating around the house. As soon as it dawned, I left as fast as I could, avoiding even looking back. The host did not show up, and the house seemed even stranger in daylight, as if it were abandoned on the outside, despite the ad showing beautiful and well-kept photos. I took some more photos to send to Airbnb support and immediately asked for the cancellation of the reservation. I spent the rest of the day trying to find another place to stay, and when I finally got it, I started receiving messages from the host asking why I had left without warning. He said strange phrases, as if he was upset not only for losing the money, but because it seemed that he expected me to have stayed. I never went into details with the host again, blocked the number, and finalized the report through the application. The support gave me a refund, but until today I haven't received a real explanation about what was happening in that house. I only know that something there was not normal, and that the positive reviews of the ad did not reflect even closely what I experienced. Since then, I think twice before booking any Airbnb, even with good notes and beautiful photos. This experience showed me how easy it can be to fall into a strange situation without realizing it. And you, have you ever gone through something similar in an online hosting? Or would you have the courage to sleep in a place like this after hearing footsteps and feeling someone trying to open your door? Story 2. I've always liked traveling to quiet places, so when I found that chalet in the countryside of Canada, I thought it was perfect to spend a week alone, away from the noise of the city. The photos showed a cozy cabin, surrounded by trees and with a beautiful view of the mountains. The arrival was quiet, and on the first day, everything seemed normal. It was only at checkout, while organizing my things, that something made me deeply uncomfortable. When tidying up the living room, I noticed a folded note under the sofa. The lyrics were shaky and only said, "Where is Jenny?" I thought it was strange, but I assumed it was something forgotten by a previous guest. Until I started to notice that it wasn't just a lost ticket. When I opened the drawer of the bedside table, I found another crumpled note, this time written in larger letters, "He's looking." The stomach turned at the time. At every corner I checked, another piece of paper appeared, behind the mirror, inside a pot in the kitchen, even inside the bathroom cabinet. Everyone brought short sentences, but loaded with something disturbing, as if they had been left there on purpose. The strangest thing was that there was no mention of dates or names of previous guests. Only those messages without context, repeated several times in different places of the cottage. Some talked about reflections in windows, others just repeated the name Jenny in increasingly shaky letters. I began to feel watched, as if the tickets were part of a warning that I couldn't decipher. I remembered that I had spent several nights looking through the living room window, enjoying the view, without imagining that maybe someone could be watching from outside. The idea that those notes mentioning reflections could refer to just that gave me goosebumps. I went back to each window of the cabin, pulled all the curtains and locked the doors, even though I knew I was already leaving. As I finished packing my suitcase, I couldn't stop thinking about who had written those sentences. Were they from a previous guest? From the owner of the cottage himself? Or worse, from someone who still had access to the place? The silence around, mixed with the distant sound of the wind between the trees, only increased the feeling that I was leaving something behind, something I didn't want to be discovered. Before leaving, I decided to take some pictures of the tickets to show the host, and also as proof, if necessary. While I was collecting some to photograph, I realized that some papers were wet, as if they had been left there recently. This made me even more nervous, because until then I believed that they could be remnants forgotten a long time ago. On the way to the car, carrying the suitcase, I had the clear feeling of being watched from the tree line. I didn't see anything, but the weight of that possibility stayed with me throughout the way back to the city. When I finally handed over the key and asked the host about the tickets, he just smiled uncomfortably and said, "Oh, things like that always appear there." At that moment, I was sure he knew more than he was saying. The way he looked away and changed the subject made me even more uncomfortable. I never received a real explanation about those tickets, but to this day I wonder who Jenny was, who was looking, and why so many messages were spread throughout the rooms. Since then, I have never rented isolated places alone. I still think about that cottage and wonder what other people may have found there after me. And you, would you have the courage to spend a week in a place where someone clearly left strange messages hidden in every corner? Story 3. My girlfriend and I decided to spend the weekend in an Airbnb in Los Angeles, nothing luxurious, but well located and with good reviews. The idea was to rest, cook something simple, and enjoy the time together. Everything seemed normal until the second night, when I noticed a little light flashing in the smoke detector above the bed. At first, I thought it was just a technical detail, maybe the weak battery. But the more I looked, the stranger it seemed. The light blinked at short intervals, as if it were recording. I took a chair, went up, and when I opened the lid, my stomach turned. There was a micro camera hidden inside, pointed directly at where we slept. I showed it to my girlfriend, and panic took over both of them. She immediately wanted to get out of there, but it was already past midnight, and we were in a region we didn't know well. We decided to disassemble the camera and keep it as proof, because it didn't make sense to simply ignore that. The biggest shock was to think about how long it could be working, and if other people had already been recorded before. The next morning, we confronted the host, trying to stay calm. We showed the camera and asked what that was. He just laughed nervously and said it was a different smoke sensor. I didn't know if he was trying to deceive us, or if he really thought someone would believe that excuse. The weather got heavy at the time. We left the place immediately and went to look for a hotel, even though we had to pay out of our pocket. On the way, I contacted Airbnb support, sending photos and explaining the situation. They asked for details and assured that they would investigate, but the feeling was that it would not be something solved quickly. What made me most restless was imagining where those recordings would end up. For days, I was reviewing in my head every moment we spent in that room, every conversation, every detail. The feeling of invasion was so great that even at home, already far from there, he looked at every corner, every detector and even sockets, suspicious of everything. I never thought that something apparently safe like an Airbnb could become such a disturbing experience. Until today, I have not received a clear answer about that case. Airbnb refunded part of the stay, but the host's ad remained active for months. I don't know if the camera was connected to him or someone before, but it doesn't matter. The feeling of being watched without knowing it never left my head. Since then, anywhere I stay, I check all the detectors, mirrors, and even sockets before relaxing. Maybe I'll never find out who was behind it, but I learned in the worst way that you can't trust just photos and good reviews. And you, would you have the courage to continue in a room after finding a hidden camera above the bed? Story 4. I've been a host at Airbnb for a few years, and I've been through strange situations, but none like this. In Boston, I rented a 2-story house for tourists, and it was common for guests to forget objects or leave a mess. But on a Monday morning, after a normal checkout, I received a call from the cleaning team that left me in shock. They said one of the rooms was locked inside. This didn't make sense, since the guests had returned the keys and guaranteed that they had left normally. I thought maybe someone had forgotten to unlock the door before leaving, but the feeling of something wrong didn't leave my head. I authorized the team to force the door, because there was no other way to open it. When they finally got it, the room was empty. No bags, clothes, or any guest sign. But the window was wide open, and the carpet, which I had cleaned myself a few days before, was full of mud marks, as if someone had entered or left in a hurry. That made me even more nervous because, according to the app, the guests had checked out hours before and were already on their way to the airport. I checked the messages myself, and they really had no reason to come back. The idea that someone strange could have entered that house in the middle of the night began to weigh a lot. The cleaning team swore they hadn't touched the window, and everyone said that, when they arrived, the door was already locked from the inside. This meant that someone had to be there after the guests left. Reviewing the external cameras, I didn't see anything suspicious, but the vision didn't directly reach that bedroom window, which made me even more apprehensive. I spent the whole afternoon trying to understand what could have happened. I thought about invasion, but there were no signs of burglary in any of the external doors. The fact that the window was open indicated that someone really passed by, but I couldn't imagine why. No object was taken, nothing was broken. Just that disturbing detail of the mud marks on the carpet, like a signature left on purpose. In the following days, I became obsessed with the situation. I hired a locksmith to check all the locks in the house, installed additional cameras, and even considered stopping renting for a while. I couldn't get the image of that locked room out of my head. It was as if someone had spent the night there, watched the guests leave, and then simply left through the window. The scariest thing is that I never found out who could have done this. Airbnb investigated but found nothing abnormal. The neighbors also did not report strange movement. To this day, when I pass through the corridor of that house, I feel a chill in my stomach just looking at that door. And I keep thinking, what if I hadn't been noticed? Could someone have stayed there, hiding, waiting? Since then, I've never been able to look at that room the same way. I changed the lock, moved the furniture, but the feeling that someone was really there without permission never disappeared. It was not just a matter of invasion of space, but of imagining that someone could enter, hide, and leave without leaving almost any trace. This experience completely changed the way I manage my real estate. Now I personally check every detail before and after a stay. But I still wonder, who locked that door from the inside and went out the window? Would you, in my place, be able to continue renting the house after something like this? Don't leave yet, the scariest story is still ahead. If you're enjoying these, subscribe now. Welcome to Dark Hours. Story 5. I rented an apartment through Airbnb in New York because I needed to stay a few days at work. The place looked great in the photos, modern, clean, and well located. I checked in at night, tired from the trip. I left my things in the living room and went to sleep thinking I had been lucky to find such a practical place. The next morning, while I was looking for cutlery in the kitchen, I opened one of the drawers and found something that didn't make sense. It was a small box wrapped in simple paper, as if it were a forgotten gift. I was strange, but even stranger was what was inside. A printed photo of myself entering the building the night before. At the time, I was paralyzed. I looked through the box, looking for some explanation, but it was just the photo and nothing else. The most disturbing thing was that the image seemed to have been printed recently, with bright colors, as if someone had taken it and revealed it in a few hours. This meant that someone was watching me from the moment I arrived. I ran to the window to see if there was any camera or angle that could justify that, but I didn't see anything. Then I started to open the rest of the drawers and cabinets, but I didn't find any other strange object. Still, the idea that someone followed my steps, took pictures, and then left it as a memory, left me with a knot in my stomach. I showed the photo to the doorman of the building, but he swore he hadn't seen anyone suspicious around. He said that the movement was quiet that night, which only made me more suspicious, because for someone to capture that image, they needed to be very close to the entrance. The feeling was that the person who photographed me knew the place well. I thought about contacting the host, but I hesitated. If he was the one who had left the photo, What could I expect from an answer? At the same time, if it wasn't, it meant that someone had access to the apartment before me, or maybe even while I was already staying. The uncertainty was as suffocating as the discovery itself. That night, I tried to sleep, but any noise in the hallway or upstairs made me alert. I locked the door, leaned a chair against the stop, and left the light in the living room on. Even so, I woke up several times, with the impression that someone could be standing outside waiting. The simple fact that photo existed was enough to make me feel vulnerable. The next day, I decided to leave the apartment ahead of schedule. I called Airbnb support and reported the situation, attaching photos of the proof. They apologized, but never gave me a clear answer about what had happened. To this day, I keep that photo with me. I don't know if as a memory or warning. Since then, I can no longer stay in an Airbnb without searching every corner of the place, opening all the drawers and checking cabinets before relaxing. The feeling that someone was close enough to take that photo never left my head. The strangest thing is that, as much as I tried to understand, I never found out who did it or why. To this day, I wonder if it was some kind of warning, a bad joke, or something much more disturbing. If you were in my place, finding a picture of you inside a drawer, would you still have the courage to spend another night in that apartment? Story 6. I rented an isolated Airbnb in Vermont because I needed a few days of rest. The house was on a dirt road, surrounded by trees, with no close neighbors. At first, I thought it was perfect because I was looking for silence and tranquility after weeks of work. But on the second night, this feeling changed completely. It was around 2 in the morning when I woke up with a strange noise coming from the basement. At first, I thought it was just the wood cracking because of the cold, but soon the sounds became clearer. Heavy steps dragging, as if someone was walking down there. The detail is that I was alone in the house. I picked up my cell phone and sent a message to the host, explaining that I was hearing loud noises in the basement and asking if there was any explanation. The answer came quickly, but that's what made me even more uncomfortable. Ignore. It's nothing that can hurt you. I stared at that sentence for minutes, trying to understand if he was joking or if he really knew what was happening. The idea of simply going back to sleep seemed impossible. I put a chair leaning against the bedroom door and was silent, trying to listen. The noise came at intervals, as if something or someone was slowly moving from one side to the other down there. Sometimes it would stop, and then start again stronger. I knew I wouldn't have the courage to go down to the basement alone, so I tried to convince myself that maybe it was just some animal stuck down there. But what didn't make sense was the weight of the steps. They didn't sound like something small. In addition, every time the noise stops, it seemed that there was a purposeful pause, as if someone was listening too. I looked out the window and saw only the darkness of the forest, the rain beating weakly on the leaves. I thought about leaving and going to the car, but the way to the entrance was long, and I would have to go through the living room, right next to the door that led to the basement. The feeling was that any movement of mine could draw attention to whatever was down there. I decided to call the host again, but this time he didn't answer. I tried to insist. I called 2-3 times and nothing. With each unanswered call, the noise in the basement seemed to intensify, as if it were reacting to my attempt to ask for help. I got goosebumps just thinking about this coincidence. I sat on the bed, motionless, with my cell phone in my hand and the flashlight on, without the courage to approach the door. At one point, I heard something scratch the wood, very lightly, as if scraping nails or claws against it. It was impossible to confuse. It was happening on the other side of the door that gave access to the basement. Time didn't seem to pass. Every minute in that isolated house sounded like an eternity. I even thought about calling the police, but what would I say? Who was hearing footsteps in the basement of an Airbnb? I myself doubted if anyone would take that seriously. Even so, I had the phone on the dial screen, ready to press the button if something worse happened. Suddenly, the noises stopped. The silence was so sudden that it became even more disturbing. I was attentive, holding my breath, trying to catch any sound. It was at that moment that I realized something I hadn't noticed before. The air was colder, as if a current of air had come from inside the house, and not from outside. I got up slowly and went to the bedroom door, without opening it completely. The corridor was illuminated only by the dim light of the cell phone flashlight. When I looked in the direction of the room, I realized that the door that gave access to the basement was now leaning, when I was sure that I left it closed and locked before sleeping. That left me floorless. My heart raced. If someone had really left there, they would already be inside the house. I ran back to the room, locked the door, and pushed the dresser against her. I spent the rest of the night awake, listening to every snap of the wood, every drop of rain, with the feeling that I was not alone. As soon as the sun rose, I grabbed my things in a hurry and left the house without looking back. I sent one last message to the host saying I was leaving, but I never got an answer. I checked out through the app, and to this day, that ad still appears active, as if nothing had happened. I never found out what was really in that basement, and maybe it's better this way. But the host's sentence doesn't leave my head. It's nothing that can hurt you. Did he want to reassure me, or was he just confirming that he knew exactly what was down there? And you, in my place, would have stayed in that house after that night. Story 7. I rented a loft in Seattle for a few weeks, since I needed a temporary place while working on a project. The space was modern, well located, and had a small balcony, where I used to have breakfast in the morning, or just breathe some fresh air at night. But from the first days, I noticed something that started to bother me. Whenever I went out on the balcony, the neighbor of the front building was there, staring at me. At first, I tried not to give importance. I thought it could be a coincidence. Maybe he also liked to be outside at the same time. But as the days passed, his gaze no longer seemed casual. He didn't wave, didn't deviate, just stood still, following my every move. That was making me more and more uncomfortable, to the point that I avoided using the balcony. One night, I returned from the market around 9, and when I opened the loft door, I noticed a white envelope on the floor. I thought it was some message from the host, or maybe a wrong delivery. But when I took it, I saw that it was a handwritten note. The message was short, but left me without reaction. I liked the dress you wore today. At that moment, I felt my stomach turn. I had really worn a dress that day, something simple to go out quickly and buy some things. The problem was, how did anyone know that? No one inside the building had contact with me, and I had never mentioned details of what I wore to anyone. The note only confirmed that someone was watching me very closely. I spent the night awake, mentally reviewing every moment of my day. I remembered that, when I left in the morning, the neighbor of the building opposite was on the balcony as always. And now it made perfect sense. He had seen me leaving, paid attention to what I was wearing, and then left that note. The idea that he had crossed the street and entered my building just to put it under my door made me even more nervous. I locked all the doors and windows, and even dragged a chair to reinforce the entrance. With every sound in the hallway, I held my breath, imagining that it could be him. I thought about calling the host, but I was so scared that I could only concentrate on not making noise. I didn't want to give the slightest clue that I was panicking. The next morning, I decided to act as if nothing had happened. I left to work on another shift, and on purpose, I avoided looking at his balcony. But it didn't help. When I came back at night, the man was there again, standing still, as if he had waited all day just to observe me. This time, I closed the curtains immediately without hesitation. Even so, the feeling of being watched didn't pass. I prepared a coffee, sat on the couch, and, even with the curtains closed, I felt that his gaze crossed the walls. I looked at the door several times, hoping to find another note, but nothing appeared that night. Silence did not bring me peace. On the contrary, it seemed to forehard something worse. 2 days later, when I came back from a walk, I noticed something strange in the corridor of the building. The door to my loft was closed, but there was a small mark on the stop, as if someone had tried to force the lock. There was no ticket, but that brand was worse than any message. It meant that someone had tried to get in. I ran inside, locking it quickly, and I started thinking if it wasn't better to leave that Airbnb immediately. But I was in Seattle for work, and changing places at the last minute would be complicated. So I decided to install a chair against the door every night and keep the curtains always closed, hoping that would be enough. That same night, while I was trying to sleep, I heard a metallic noise coming from the balcony. I got up slowly, and with my heart racing, I moved the curtain away just a little. I didn't see anyone, but there was something different. A coin left right in the center of the parapet. I hadn't put that there. It was as if it was a clear sign that someone had been there, so close to me, without me noticing. The next morning, I sent a message to the host, explaining the situation and asking to leave before the deadline. He answered only with "of course, no problem," without showing surprise. I packed my bags as fast as I could, and left without looking back. To this day, I don't know if the neighbor was just a strange man, or if he had really crossed the street to invade my space. All I know is that that note is still in my memory, and I wonder, if I had stayed, what would have happened later? Story 8. I arrived in Chicago for a short trip and booked an Airbnb because it looked more cozy than a hotel. The room was simple, but it had a huge mirror occupying almost the entire side wall. From the first night, I felt something strange about that mirror. It wasn't just the size, but the way it reflected the light. It seemed out of place, as if it hadn't been put there just for decoration. In the following days, I began to notice small things. The mirror vibrated almost imperceptibly when there was absolute silence, as if there was something behind it. I thought it was paranoia until one night, moved by curiosity, I pulled the mirror slightly. To my surprise, he moved away from the wall with ease, revealing a narrow and dark space behind him. I pressed the cell phone flashlight and lit up the space. It was too small to be considered a room, but big enough for someone to sit. On the floor, there was a chair leaning against the wall and several cigarette butts scattered, some still with a strong smell, as if they had been extinguished recently. The shock was immediate. It didn't seem abandoned. My whole body became tense. If someone had really used that space, it meant that they could have observed me without me noticing. I pushed the mirror back to the place with trembling hands and stood still, staring at my own reflection. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was just looking at myself, but that there was something or someone on the other side. That night, I couldn't sleep well. Any snap of the building made me look at the mirror, wondering if someone was back there, sitting in that chair. I kept wondering how many times he had been there, watching me, maybe while I changed my clothes or simply rested without suspecting anything. The feeling of invasion was suffocating. The next day, I decided to inspect better. I pulled the mirror more carefully, and this time, I noticed something I hadn't noticed before: a half-full bottle of water in the corner. There was no dust on it, which meant that someone had left it there a short time ago. The air seemed heavier, with the smell of impregnated tobacco. It was at that moment that I felt the certainty that I was not only dealing with something old or forgotten, but with a recently used space. I pushed the mirror back to the place, but this time I put a chair leaning against it, as if it would prevent someone from leaving there. I spent the rest of the night sitting in bed, staring at the reflection and trying to hear any sign of movement. At times, I had the impression of hearing a slight drag, but I couldn't distinguish if it came from the corridor or from behind the mirror. The next day, I contacted the host and mentioned the hidden space. He just replied dryly, saying that it was an old structural detail of the house, and that there was no cause for concern. That answer only made me more suspicious. It didn't seem surprised. It seemed as if he already knew exactly what I was talking about. On the third night, I suddenly woke up with a strong cigarette smell in the room. I don't smoke, and all the windows were closed because of the cold. I took my cell phone, and the first thing I did was look in the mirror. He seemed to be in the same place, but the feeling of being watched was so intense that I could barely move. I got up slowly, approached the mirror and, by instinct, put my hand on the surface. It was hot, as if someone had just put their hand on the other side. I retreated immediately and spent the rest of the night awake, without the courage to pull the mirror again. At that moment, I was sure that space was not empty. The next morning, I packed my things and decided to leave before the deadline. I'd rather lose the money to spend another night in that room. While closing the suitcase, I heard a dry snack behind the mirror, as if the chair had been dragged lightly. I didn't wait to check it out. I closed the loft door and went down the stairs with the suitcase hitting the steps, without looking back. To this day, I don't know who used that space or for how long it happened. I kept the Airbnb confirmation note as a reminder of the worst place I've ever stayed. Whenever I see a large mirror in a room, the first thing I do is check if it is really attached to the wall. And I say something: if you were in my place, would you have the courage to pull that mirror again? Story 9. When I booked that Airbnb in Atlanta, the description clearly said whole house, which made me excited. I was traveling for work and needed a quiet place, with no one around. But as soon as I arrived, I realized that something was wrong. The host opened the door, quickly showed me the rooms and, instead of leaving as I expected, simply sat on the sofa in the living room. At first, I thought it was just a matter of time, that he would leave after organizing something. But the night came, and he was still there, sitting, looking at the television turned off, almost without saying anything. I circled around the house trying to ignore, but it was impossible not to feel his eyes accompanying me in silence. With every movement of mine, it seemed that he was watching me from the corner of my eye. I was going to the kitchen. He turned his head slightly. I went up the stairs to the room, His gaze followed until I disappeared from the field of vision. There was no conversation, no attempt at normal interaction, just that constant presence, as if he was evaluating me. On the first night, I tried to convince myself that maybe it was a misunderstanding, that he was just finishing something before leaving. But when I woke up at dawn and went down to drink water, he was still there, sitting in the same place, motionless, as if he hadn't nailed his eye all night. The TV light was now on, but on silent, and he kept just looking towards the corridor. On the second day, the situation became even more uncomfortable. I had to work on the laptop during the afternoon, and he stayed in the living room all the time, sitting a few meters from me. The silence was almost unbearable, only broken by an occasional pagaro. I tried to start a conversation, ask about the city, but he answered only with monosyllables and stared back at the wall, as if he had no interest at all. I began to notice strange details. He never answered his cell phone, never seemed to go out to buy anything, and did not use the bathroom when I was around. It was as if I was there just to watch. The discomfort grew so much that night, I locked the bedroom door from the inside, even though I knew that technically I had paid for the whole house. At dawn, I woke up with the feeling that something was wrong. I got up and noticed a beam of light passing through the lower crack of the bedroom door. I walked slowly until I got closer and realized that I was coming from the living room. I touched my ear and heard slow steps going back and forth, right in front of my room, as if he was hanging around there, waiting for some movement. My heart raced. I took my backpack, put what I could in a hurry, and sat on the bed, trying to decide what to do. The idea of opening the door and facing him made me panic. I just thought about how to get out of there without drawing attention, but at the same time, I couldn't just spend the night pretending that it was normal. I waited until I heard the sound of the rain outside to disguise my steps. I opened the door very slowly and saw that the room was empty, but the TV remained on static, illuminating the sofa where he had been all those days. I took my things and went down the stairs without looking back. I just wanted to get out of there as soon as possible. When I put my hand on the main door handle, I noticed something that made me freeze. The key was no longer in the lock. I looked around and felt his presence before I even saw it. In the reflection of the living room window, I could distinguish his silhouette standing behind me, motionless, just watching. I ran without thinking, opened the door with all my strength, and went out into the street carrying my things. I've never booked another Airbnb without checking every detail of the reviews since that night. And I tell you, have you ever been through something strange like this with hosts? Story 10. But don't leave yet, because something unexpected comes after this one. I booked a cabin in the interior of Maine thinking it would be the perfect refuge to rest on the weekend. The place was simple, with no neighbors nearby, only trees and silence. On the first night, I fell asleep peacefully, with the fireplace still burning slowly. But in the middle of the night I woke up with everything dark. The power had run out. I took my cell phone to use as a flashlight, and that's when I noticed something that left me cold. On the wooden floor, there were marks of wet footprints, as if someone had just entered. They came from the front door, and were going towards the living room. The problem is that I had locked the door before going to sleep, and now it was ajar. The first thing I did was to check if it wasn't my impression, but the more I lit up the floor, the clearer it became. Those footprints were not mine. I hadn't even gotten out of bed since the night began. I approached the door, my heart beating so hard that it seemed to echo in the silence, and I confirmed that the lock was really unlocked. Someone had moved there. I slowly returned to the center of the room, trying to understand what to do. The footprints went to the front of the sofa and simply stopped, as if the person had stopped there and disappeared afterwards. There were no exit signs, no marks returning to the door or windows. It was as if something had entered and decided to stay. I tried to convince myself that someone could have entered by mistake, perhaps a lost hunter or someone looking for shelter from the rain. But it didn't make sense. The place was too remote, and no one just shows up in the middle of the night in that region. I started to sweat cold as I looked at every corner of the room, hoping to find someone hiding. I took a chair and leaned against the door, as if it would protect me from something that had already managed to enter without being heard. The sound of the rain outside only made the silence inside the cabin even more suffocating. Every crash of the wood, every gust of wind, seemed to indicate that there was someone there, standing still, waiting for me to move. I decided to go up to the upstairs room, but each step creaked as if screaming my location. I closed the door and sat on the bed, with the flashlight pointed at the stairs, waiting for any movement. Then suddenly, I heard a dry noise, like something heavy being dragged in the room downstairs. I held the cell phone so tightly that my hands trembled. I wanted to believe it was the chair I had leaned against the door falling, but the truth is that the sound came from the center of the room, exactly where the footprints stopped. I didn't have the courage to come down. I stayed there until dawn, when I finally took a breath to run out of the cabin without looking back. When the sun finally appeared among the trees, I got the courage to go down. The room was silent, but something had changed. The chair I had placed against the door was in the middle of the room, as if it had been dragged. The wet footprints were no longer visible, only the damp floor in some places, as if someone had passed a hasty cloth. I left without even collecting my things. I just wanted distance from that place. To this day I can't explain how the door was opened by itself, or why those footprints simply stopped in the middle of the room. And I wonder, was anyone there with me all night? You've made it to the end. Thank you for listening until now. But before we close, I have one last story for you. I booked that room through Airbnb thinking it would be just a quick stop during my trip through Oregon. The house seemed ordinary, and the host was even friendly at first, but from the moment I entered I felt a strange discomfort. The room was tidy, but the way he watched my every move made it look like I was being evaluated. On the second night, after a few hours there, I decided I didn't want to stay until the end of the reservation. The atmosphere of the place made me tense, as if something was wrong. When I commented that I would leave early, the host smiled in a way that froze me and said, "Stay one more night for free. It's important that you stay." At the time I laughed nervously, trying to disguise it, and said I had appointments in another city. But he didn't take his eyes off me, as if he was waiting for me to change my mind. The way he said, "It's important," seemed less like an invitation and more of a veiled order. I didn't know how to react without seeming rude, but every minute in there started to suffocate me. I went up to pack my things, but I had the distinct feeling that I was being watched. Every time I passed through the corridor, I noticed his shadow moving through the crack in the living room door. He didn't say anything, he just stood there, hanging around. The silence, along with that insistence for me to stay, made it clear that something was wrong. While I was putting the clothes in the backpack, I heard slow footsteps going up the stairs. I was silent, waiting, until the steps stopped right in front of my door. After a few seconds, a soft beat echoed in the room, followed by his voice saying low, "Think about it, it's just another night." I held my breath and didn't answer. I stood still, motionless, until I heard the steps retreating back down the corridor. At that moment I was sure. I couldn't spend another minute there. I took my things, closed the backpack in a hurry, and began to plan how to leave without crossing him again. I looked out the window and saw my car parked on the other side of the gate. The fine rain began to fall, which drowned out any noise inside the house. I took a deep breath, opened the bedroom door, and went down slowly, trying not to make noise on the wooden steps. The room was dark, but I noticed a silhouette sitting in the armchair, motionless, as if she was waiting for me. I didn't think twice. I ran to the entrance door, turned the handle, and practically threw myself out. I heard him get up behind me, but I didn't look back. I got into the car shaking, and started the engine without even putting on the belt. The last thing I saw through the rearview mirror was the door of the house open, and he stood at the entrance, watching me as I accelerated away. I drove nonstop until I reached a 24-hour gas station. I parked and spent a few minutes taking a deep breath, trying to believe that it had really happened. I mentally reviewed every detail, his words, the way he insisted, the steps on the stairs. It was as if all the time he was waiting for something that I never wanted to find out what it was. Since then, I have never booked an Airbnb again without checking every detail, comments, and even researching about the host. But to this day I find myself thinking about what he meant by, "It's important that you stay." Important for whom? It wasn't for me. What if I had given in? Have any of you ever been through something similar? Thank you very much for your company until the end. Your support is what gives life to this channel. If these stories have caught you, don't forget to leave your like and comment on your opinion. And if you are not yet part of our community, sign up now to receive the next real horror stories.